From all this organizing, I was like, at one point, I thought to myself, great, everyone, I've farmed off the talks to the other faculty, the student panel, Kavita is organizing, great, I don't have to do anything. I'm forgetting that I had been installed as a moderator of this one. So, we're going to be a little spontaneous about it. Can I invite my the panelists onto the stage, please? Dr. Shashidhar, Dr. Harini Narendra, Siddharth Rao, and Anita Vindas, please. The panelists largely don't need an introduction. They've all, we know who they are, but Dr. Shashidhar, currently the director of NCBS, but many of us have known him professionally, actually even from before he was faculty, but certainly from the time he was head of biology at ISU Pune, from where he went on to Ashoka University, and has now, for the last 2 years, I think, been the director of NCBS. Harini and I joined our PhDs, joined CS in the same year, Harini for in PhD, me for my PhD. And she went on to do a postdoc with Elton Rostrum in Indiana and is now at, I think, Cambridge University. Harini, Praveen and I interviewed on the same day. We were made to sit on this wooden bench like school children in a row downstairs. We just went and took a picture of ourselves on that bench. So that goes back 20 years exactly. Anita Vindas is the director of ATRI, and she was at Kia University and has been involved with environmental sustainability for a long time. And Siddharth Rao again, met over a decade ago at ARRS, at Kobe Rainforest Research Station, I think, to begin with, and then was a department collective for many years, and is now with the Green Matter Foundation. And I think what we're hoping to get from this panel is different perspectives of what we call it promoting ecology, but it touches upon the theme that the students discussed as well, which is the future of ecology. And to repeat a phrase I used in the morning, I think this the sort of alumni here and the students, all of us recognize this as a very, very vibrant, ecology community in the country. How do we create more and different types of CSs, in our universe? I'm going to start off. We actually wanted to start with the question of who an ecologist is, but I think we touched upon that in the student panel a fair bit in terms of perspectives of ecology and ecologists from other scientists and non-scientists and so on. So segueing from that, I think the question that I'd really like to start with Harini and then Shashi perhaps is how have you seen ecology as a discipline grow through your career from the time that, especially in your case, Harini, as you started as a PhD student, along with many of us in the 90s, when it really was a tiny nation, people looked at you strangely, but how have you seen that grow in the last 30 odd years?
Thanks. It is, first of all, I think how has ecology grown? Just seeing the number of younger students here, it's fantastic to see. Because I think we're another 5, 6 of us maybe in the whole department, so that it was a really small community. And across the country, I think there were very few, Aparajita's here, there are many others here. Across the country also pretty much we knew everybody was doing a PhD in ecology, whether in India or outside, because there might have been 20 of us doing our PhD sort of as contemporaries working on Indian issues. So that's changed substantially and it's really nice to see. Now is the scale commensurate with the scale of the problems we have? No. I think all of us, as people connected with the environment one way or the other, would feel like we need 10 times as much as we have. But it's still very nice to see this large number. I'm also delighted to see, personally on two fronts, I think two things that ecology didn't consider. Ecology in India at least was a largely insular science when I did my PhD. I remember a lot of people saying that Madhav Gadgil doesn't really do ecology. The rest of the department does ecology. And that's changed a lot across the country too, I think. The fact that ecological systems are social ecological systems, that people work on the environment, that people need to collaborate. And it's not a soft science. These are words that I heard when I was coming into PhD with Madhav, when people sort of told me it's a soft science. It's anything goes. It's just so stories. You don't really need want to do this. It's not science. I think all of that has changed. So I'm again very happy to see that change, that we recognize that it's not just the science, we need to do the science and much more. Right? And the social science and the connected people. And the third thing, I mean, which is sort of maybe peculiar to me, but I think I started working on urban ecology about 15, 20 years ago, and again at that time there were maybe 2, 3 people working on ecology. But I'll also say the same, a lot of people said at that time that urban systems are not real ecological systems. And that has also changed. If you look at the student conference on conservation science now, year after year, you will see, I think about 30% of the students now work on urban issues. And with urbanization taking over so much of our landscape, I think it's becoming increasingly important to do so. So these are the things that I have seen in terms of the changes of ecology over time, and it's been a pleasure to see them.
Shashi, as someone who's not by training and like an ecologist, but you've been sensitive to ecology and evolutionary biology, and you've been up in the community. How do you see this landscape as having changed?
Yeah, so first, who is an ecologist? The student faculty of CES. Right. Jokes apart, I think anybody who works on natural interaction between two entities, even a non-living entity, or anybody who works on self-organization system, is an ecologist. In fact, without this definition of the true definition of ecology, we are actually losing out a lot on how we train the next generation of people who can address the matter of climate change, or even understanding oneself as an ecosystem in itself. Right? A lot of ecological interaction happens between very different molecules and self-organization of molecules, which leads to what's called a living system. And that minimum living system is a cell, it's itself in an ecosystem. And then there are multiple cells interacting with each other at the next level of complexity. I think we need to start with understanding a cell as an ecosystem, and then build the larger ecosystem at very different scales of biodiversity. Then only we should be able to conserve what we want to conserve, and also understand disease. For example, pandemic is an ecological phenomenon. Zoonosis is an ecological phenomenon. It's a natural phenomenon. And perhaps because of the way we live, we consider it as a so-called pandemic or epidemic. Right? So, given that, as we already mentioned, the scale of the problems today, we have very, very small number of ecologists in this country. I think we need to increase 10 times. And there is already, some increase has happened, as I mentioned, this group. So there are so many ecologists, and many of the students will become tomorrow faculty in different places. But unless more ecologists are recruited in universities, in ISERs and IITs, we will not be able to generate that population. Unfortunately, that's not happening. And as you mentioned, when ISERs was started, when we were recruiting ecologists, saying thing was, oh, ecology is a soft science, right? And we resisted all those comments, and we recruited. At least all ISERs have now at least 1 or 2 ecologists, but it should be at least 5 to 6 ecologists. In every biology department, there are about 25 faculty on an average. 1/5 or 1/3 should be ecologists in every department. Without that, I don't think we can actually make any impact of solving any of the solutions of the society, agriculture or climate related biodiversity, conservation, and all the diseases that we want to work
on. Anita, from your perspective?
So I'm neither an ecologist by training, now I have a bit in ecology, but I think what I definitely, like everybody else in this room and out there in the world, have been seeing the rapid changes that we're having to deal with as a planet, to see the way humans are reshaping the planet. And in that context, I believe that it is important for ecologists, even the small numbers that are still existent today, to look at issues from an interdisciplinary lens. We just cannot look at ecology in isolation. We are increasingly in a human-dominated world, and therefore the social science perspective, the economics perspective, the technology and policy perspective becoming increasingly important if we really to address environmental issues at scale. The other thing I wanted to speak about in the context of education is that it's good to embed colleges 2, 3, 4, 5 in the ISERs and the IITs and other institutions of the world. But I think the real change will come when we're able to actually make the study of ecology and ecosystems a part of every discipline. because you just cannot look at each discipline in isolation. And maybe I'll pick an example from the School of Business, which is completely unconnected to anything to do with the natural sciences. But if you really want students to understand ecological issues and planetary boundaries and look at how supply chains can get more sustainable, you cannot do that by just teaching environmental studies as an elective, offering sustainability studies as an elective, and hoping that 10 out of the 100 students will enroll for that and pick up something along the way. And when they go on to become business leaders, they will incorporate these learnings into their work. I think it's increasingly important to be able to embed an understanding of ecology and environmental sciences into every course that students go through, be it design, be it business, or be it technology. Without that, you're really not going to be able to have meaningful change in addressing the challenges.
I think that sort of like segues very nicely into the next question that I want Siddharth to start with, which is, what I'd written down was what's the relevance of ecology, and I want to modify that a little bit and say what's the relevance of an ecological science, if there is any. And you've worked with communities, you've worked on the ground, and there's a general sense that we can make these sort of general mother statements that there's a lot of climate change, there's problems. Of course, we need ecologists, we need more students, we need more science, and we say that all the time. But we're scientists, and it's convenient for us to say that. And I want to question, I want you to be honest about it. When we just say we need more ecology, do we need more ecological science, or do we need to think about that whole thing much more broadly?
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually a failed ecologist in that sense. I did my master's in ecology, and then I was like, man, I'm not like a Mahesh who really wants to go and do research. I'm a naturalist. Okay? I want to be out messing around with some snake and running around. And I think we need more of that. And we need more ecologists. We need more pure science-based, just for the sake of science, ecology. I truly believe that. And I think in India it's really low. But that's not where it stops. I think that's just one small part of it. And it's interesting because if you look at most people people ask questions like what's the link between nature and climate change? Like, why are you even working on biodiversity conservation or ecology if you're addressing climate change? And these are people who are taking decisions on certain things around, right? So I think the level at which we're so disconnected from nature and natural systems is unprecedented now, and I think that needs to really increase. When it comes to working with communities and people in rural areas, I think people actually have a very strong understanding of ecology. May not be in a formal sense, but it's disappearing, but it's there. So I think the role of ecologists is, in that sense, is again, I think kind of what everyone else was saying. So how do we take it outside just the pure science part, which is important. But I think as students of ecology, I think there's also an option to not just do pure science. And it is multidisciplinary, or what is needed now is probably to be able to look at how the world functions and also use your ecological understanding to answer questions or solve problems in the real world. And that has really helped me, like the fact that I have spent enough time outdoors with animals and plants and actually also studying ecology formally, but just that helps you navigate problem solving when it comes to climate change or these things.
Cool. So, we navigate around these questions by acknowledging, the importance of each of these sort of separate parts of it, right? The science and the policy and the community and so on. And when we make those, one obviously agrees with everything all of you have said. Implicit in that is the idea that it's not a zero-sum game, right? Let's assume that we'll grant that and say we need 5x or 10x of what's happening today. But whatever x it is, you still have to divide that x into science and policy and community, right? So I'm going to give you like 5 seconds to think of how each of you wants to divide it. And I'm going to ask you to tell us, okay? So I'm putting you on the spot. So if you had to divide your x into percentages of science, policy, and bottom-up community work, how would each of you personally, there's obviously no right answer over here, except the one that I have. There's no right answer. But I'm just curious because you all come from very different backgrounds, and I'm just curious about whether there's, and it's fine if there's no convergence also. In fact, I'm hoping there'll be no convergence because then I can push you on that. But I'd like to know. So I'm going to do the count. I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You guys have got the mics. Go first.
60, 20, 20. So 60 community because of ownership, and 20 is science and 20 is policy and other things. But 60, 20.
Start. Anita.
20, 30, 30. 40 for the science, 30 for the community, and 30 for policy.
Okay. Nini?
And cheap because I think they're all interconnected and you should have the science guys working with the policy guys, the policy working with the community. That said, I would still say at this point in the planet, 10% science, not that we don't need science, but if we only do the science, the planet will change and we'll understand the science and we will have no ecology left. So I'll go with 40%, 40%, maybe 20%.
I don't know, I'm going to just reverse what why we need more scientists? We are actually losing out, further policy. There are no scientists in most of the policy discussion or policy decisions. There are no scientists who actually help the community to understand the scientific basis of any solution that you found there, sustainable solution. There aren't enough scientists to educate the large decision makers. I think more the number of scientists, automatically many good solutions, diverse solutions, sustainable solutions will emerge, and also outreach, communication, training happens. So 60 to
Shashi, you're cheating. Those scientists are doing policy and community work anyhow. So I think the science,
So, I don't know.
like the scientists like us who don't do all of that other stuff, But fair point. I mean, I think so. Shashi started out by justifying why you thought it needed to be weighed that way, and I'm going to come back to each of you and have you elaborate a little bit, Harini, you and then Anita and Siddharth as well, on why you think that is, because there's really two parts to this problem in terms of driving the change in the future, right? One is the magnification of in the into X thing that we all desire. That's an easy one. But then how that pie is cut up is really critical for whether we achieve those changes or not. So Harini, why did you're a scientist, we started our PhDs together, and under your scheme, I wouldn't have a job.
Are you a scientist?
I wouldn't have a job. Not so much. No, I mean, if I had to, I said I wouldn't pick sides, but I would have actually said what you said. I would have said 10%, but you should justify it. I'm the moderator.
More seriously, I think it's a common feeling of science, and I started there very much, to say, here I am, I'm developing policy relevant one, take it. Policymakers don't take it unless you've been with them from the start, co-building questions, co-building areas of investigation. That's the first thing. The second thing is a lot of it, what is against us is not the knowledge of what to do, but the politics of how to act, and that politics is driven by the money and the power that comes with it. And so I think, I agree with you, Shashi, that we need to have more scientists and policy-based communities, but that's not going to change anything unless we figure out some way to connect with the world which is driven by the power and money, which somehow ecology is at the bottom of that. So I don't think just working with communities is one way to shift that power. But it really comes down to the cross conversation. So I'll pick up on what Shashi said, that I think the numbers must go more than 100 because you have everybody talking to us. Because what science do you want, right? If you want a very deep, driven science into one small niche, which I personally love, but I don't know if we have the luxury of doing that alone anymore or putting the large bulk of funding to us. We can go back to that once we fix the problems of X thing might not be around for us to study in the next 20 years if we do this.
Right. And it begs all of these questions, right? So when Shashi says, for example, scientists need to work with policymakers, or scientists need to work with communities. If I randomly polled a group of ecologists, many of them, like me, don't want to sit in government offices and wait forever for a conversation. There are many others who don't want to sit and talk to people in the village. So those sorts of scientists might not be very useful in this. This field.
At least the always a small percentage.
Yes. So, but I do want to like pick up on that and come back to you, Anita. You sort of work more in that sphere in the sense of like, what kind of changes do we need to make to bring about the kind of conversations that Harvey is talking about, to make the money and the politics, integral to the works that we do. How does one even do that?
I'd like to first go back to what Shashi said, and I agree with him that it's not about scientists continuing to play a pure science role and only focusing on the discovery of knowledge and knowledge production. There's of course the dissemination aspect, but I don't think it's just about dissemination. It's about active engagement and co-creation. And if you're not going to be able to look at all your pathways to change, whether it be research or action or policy engagement or capacity building, then you're really never going to be truly able to contribute to addressing real world problems. And therefore, if you looked at the scientist from a perspective of, so it goes back to what is your X? Is your X time? Is your X resources? Is your X kinds of skills? I'm not sure what that X is. And the answer and percentage will vary depending on what that X is.
That's a really good point. I think time and resources is one thing, but when you say skills, perhaps skills is a less of a zero-sum game than time and resources are. That's a lovely point. But you also used another word in between. You said co-creation, and I want you to expand on that because I think that's a very core idea in this that's implicit that all of us are like nodding our heads about. Maybe if you just elaborate.
So I think a lot of the focus typically tends to be, let's say policy, for example, to start with, and then maybe look at community. The policy context, as you said, we kind of tend to, say, I produce this and here it is for your consumption, and if you like it, take it. I'm not really obligated to kind of work with you through it. At the reverse, we crib that policy comes and says, give me in 3 days answers to, how the universe got created. And you're not going to be able to answer that in 3 days. But I think it's about, if you map the environmental issues and challenges and also map what policy is prioritized from a national perspective, from a regional perspective, from a local perspective, and start looking at those intersectionalities and commonalities where you can work together, then you at least have a long-term program that you're working on specific departments. You could follow schemes, you could follow money, you could follow national priorities, but what is important is to be able to sit together and understand what is important and figure out how to bring the evidence that policy needs to better shape policy outcomes and policy-related regulations. In the context of community, again, I think in our experience, I think we've had multiple community conservation centers across the country, and the learning has been that when you work closely with community and first of all co-define the issue together and then co-create solutions, there is greater ownership and stewardship over a period of time. And you're able to exit at some point in time because the community takes over the stewardship of the landscape and the issues. Otherwise, you just go in, we then say CSR gives money only for 3 years. What can I achieve in 3 years? I go and do some transactional work, publish a report, walk out. And everything just kind of disintegrates back to where it was before you came. So I think working with communities and working with policies, from identifying the issue and working on solutions together is extremely critical to really bring about change. Of course, you need the science, but science needs to come to support action on the ground.
So that I want to elaborate on both Anita's point and what Harini said about some political change coming about by empowering, bottom up. And so I'll ask you the follow up after you sort of talked a little bit about why that community mode is so important.
I think if you're looking at having a planet which has wildlife on it, has people being able to use the resources that we are sustaining, we're looking at a decently functioning set of ecosystems, then if that's what we're aiming to have, then I think ecology and then the pure ecological science will go down from a 20 even less, right? But ecology as a science, I would still say 20% of things because it's really, people just don't understand it at any level, how things function, and there's a lot to do there. But the reason I would say communities are at the center of it, and when I say communities, it's not this romanticized rural communities because there's no one such thing. But when you look at ownership, or you look at why people want certain things, anything, and when you talk of conservation for whom and why, it really has to be embedded in people wanting to take care of their place or their wildlife. And if that is not focused on, then it doesn't matter. And people will fight back against policies. People will push for those things. I mean, I've only seen conservation work very well in those terms, where you actually stand up and go and there's stop a bulldozer that comes through and you push something from happening. Because you can, I think this whole thing of trying to look at policy without looking at communities requires communities to push back and say that, you know what, these are the policies we want. And so I do focus really a lot on bridging work with communities wherever they are and building ownership there. That would always be my priority, regardless of what we're trying to achieve in that sense.
You actually answered the second part of my question, which was going to be, we often see us, when we say science policy and community and, the institutions that have been set up, it often looks at those scientists as sort of as the bridge between policy. What do you do as an applied ecologist or a conservation scientist? I work with communities on this side. I work with policy on the other hand. Many institutions have been set up to do that, and we see ourselves as being in the middle. But right at the beginning, you said, and I want to emphasize, you said why I put communities in the middle, and you then talked about communities engaging with policy, right? Where we at best are knowledge providers, as well. I'm sort of like paraphrasing what you said, but I just want to emphasize that that's a very different perspective from the standardized institutional change perspective. Even when we've talked about CES today, we say CES should do more dissemination. But it's not as a CES being at the center of this network is an important part of your message. And
I think like as we have different NGOs, different research communities, different people, I think we've confused, because in India, like you said, I mean, there were few people doing just research. So the person studying whatever, black buck or a friend, I'm responsible for it. Or this is, it's my thing, but it's not. It is that rural communities black buck or not. And that's where it starts. So we are enablers in a lot of things. I mean, researchers are kind of enablers. And sometimes because no one else is picking up that role, we want to jump in. And so you see a lot of community organizations trying to be owners of problems or owners of things. I think those roles and what we play have to start slowly becoming clear, because we are less confused about we try and do a whole bunch of things, and it just gets messy. So really putting ownership back on people whose place it is, and then looking at what we as either researchers or as conservationists are really good at. Like you said, you may not want to sit in the forest department office. You should really figure out for you not to be there. And someone who really enjoys that to do that. Or you look at how a lot of ecologists don't want to sit and have tea in a village. It's true. That's because most conservation programs will not have a social scientist who actually love doing that. But we'll have 6 ecologists on the team. And then as an afterthought, 3 years later, when we realize that, oh my God, no one understands what we're doing, we hire one TIS graduate who will come and we'll be sitting and having chai there in the village and we'll do really great, but we'll have no clue about the ecology part. So this interdisciplinary stuff, bridging it, I think we really need to start figuring out better.
I do imagine more of that's happening, at least at the science level, thanks in a sense to A3's interdisciplinary program was started 20 years ago. Many of us were associated with A3 in those days, and it really sort of now is much more widespread. But it goes beyond the science, right? Oh, in between, I wanted to say, Kavita Siddharth says you're off the hook. So,
sorry, I put blank one.
So, but it sort of leads me to what I'd like perhaps to be the last question that I sort of pose to the panel, and then we can sort of like open it out, is where this is all leading in a sense, we put it sort of nostalgically and flippantly as how do we build more CESs? And the answer right from the beginning was not about more CESs, right? It was more something, but we're not sure what. And my question, and I want to preface this by saying that there's one part of my brain, and I'm sure that I speak for many students and faculty in this department that feel that it's perfectly reasonable to do some science of ecology or evolution that has no relevance to the world at all. And that's okay. I want to stipulate that and not have all of you walk out of this room going, oh my God, what am I doing with my life? Right? So that's okay. But my question was what does an ecological science of the future look like? But I want to say, what does a socially relevant ecological science of the future look like, and how do we achieve that? And perhaps we can start back at the other end with Shashi and go around. I'd like your very different perspectives on what would you do? So Shashi, this is like, I want to rephrase the question. I want to put the question the following way.
Action.
Huh?
Action.
Yeah. No, question point, which is, in interviews we often say, what kind of research would you like to do? And they say, birds, butterflies, blah, blah. And so then we look at them and say, supposing you had an unlimited amount of money, right? Supposing your PhD supervisors said do whatever you want. What would you do with your PhD? Okay, that's not offers not being paid. Just to be clear, okay? But that's my question to you guys. If you just had resources and the ability to speak in someone's ear, what would that, in your mind, this idealized, socially relevant science in India be?
So, without the pure understanding of ecological science, we will use the word applied ecological science. I don't know what you mean by the three words together. For me, ecological science is ecological science, just science. And we use that science to apply for some real life problems. So finally, you read the science first, and then how to apply. Just take the Bangalore ecosystem. You have CES and then NCES where the more so-called take you ecological science is being practiced. But so many other organizations, you have NCR, CWS, NEET, whatever, WCS, AG, right? And put together all of this, there will be at least 200 faculty level scientists working both on fundamental questions related to ecology and its application, and also working with the community, right? So if you create these kind of ecosystem, not just how many CES, how many Bangalore ecosystem. I mean, we have literally noticed nowhere in this country we have, other than Bangalore, an ecosystem where you have 200 ecology scientists. Ecology, of course, ecology, organic biology, and physical together, right? And we don't have that, and we need to bring that one. Now, why students trained in this city are doing better wherever they go? They work with scientists, they work with communities, they work with the government, and even if they quote unquote become IFS officers, they are somewhat different than the other IFS officers because they are trained in this city, in being part of this community. I think what we need to create is these kind of ecosystem in almost all parts of the country, at least 10 more. Then I'm sure we'll be changing the science that we do, we do more community engaged work, better policy. The policy again, without policy, uncoupled with strategy, nothing is going to happen. Like what happened to ADP. The fantastic ADP, if you read it, was 65-page document. It's a really ideal, novel, and also a model education policy for any country to change the world. Look at the implementation. Horrible, right? So without strategy of implementation, no policy will work. So that's why scientists working with the communities will help to develop strategies. Scientists working with policy makers or decision makers help in making better policies. So we need to create that kind of ecosystem.
Excellent. That certainly makes the students and the postdocs very happy because they'll all be looking for jobs soon. So Shashi is the most popular panelist. Have a minute, please.
I'm going to speak again from personal experience because somewhat fortunate in having a lot of not personal money but corpus money from Azipur University to actually set up a school, a Center for Climate Change and Sustainability, which is now a school. We have 13 faculty, we might have 4 more in the in the next year, which is means we've gone from 0 to 17 in years.
I forgot to mention AP.
Yeah. But I would say broad, which is what we did with the university, which is to say what kind of people do we have? We have 2 people doing urban ecology, we have an urban governance specialist, we have someone looking at permafrost, we have someone looking at glaciers, we have an air pollution expert, a toxicologist, and someone looking at soil. Okay, so that's the kind of people that we are putting together. We have 2 conservation biologists. And if you get the cross conversations that we are actually getting by being in that one corridor where our rooms face each other, we've developed a BSc program where you learn environmental science, biodiversity and climate change, and then the social and economic aspect of it. We are now starting an MSc program in July, which will again have climate change and sustainability, which is a bit of everything. Our idea being that so much money is going into CSR and corporate driven sustainability that people don't understand the I mean, for instance, a nature-based solution. Everyone thinks planting trees is fantastic, and you can plant eucalyptus and that's a carbon sink. So how do you think about all of these sustainability metrics? How do you think of the justice side of your sustainability metrics? All of these, we can teach this in a large frame because we have interpreted the idea of ecology very broadly. And so that's what I would say we need to be doing. We also say, like, and that comes back to the idea of the zero-sum game. I mean, I like Anita's point of are you seeing skills or you seeing time or money? Because really what we have is everybody who's in there is not a pure, they have a pure core, but they're much more than that because they're people who are interested in collaborating. And so everybody's always knocking on someone's door and going across. And that I think is really important. If you can do skills based, you get that multiplicative effect when you're having conversations. So the sum is so much more than the whole is so much more than the sum is one.
Yeah, I'm going to look at it a little differently, Karthik, and not necessarily from what our institution should be doing, but what's happening in the world out there. And I'm going to stick with economics as a lens and look at the World Economic Forum's reports. And deliberately choosing WEF reports because it's as economic and as capitalistic as it gets in terms of numbers. And here goes some numbers. 50% of global GDP, I think 1% now depends moderately or significantly on nature and natural ecosystems. The second report that came out a few years back spoke about 3 impact sectors in the economy that actually threaten 80% of the IUCN regulars threatened and near threatened species. And that's to do with the infrastructure and built environment, which came second, but food, land, and ocean use, which came first, and extractives and energy, which came third. And this is data put out by WEF. My point is, why are we not engaging with these sectors? And I know and I have these conversations in A3, and we always discuss about should we engage with the marketplace or not. We look at policy as mechanisms to scale. But a lot of policy is influenced by the marketplace, and the marketplace is the biggest scaling mechanism. So when that data is being put out in terms of dependence on natural ecosystems and nature, in terms of impact on species, and then when you look at the World Economic Forum's risk reports over the last 20 years, biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and lack of access to natural resources is sitting in the top 5 risks for the last 5 years continuously. Not for today, but for 10 years from today. And the 10 years from today keeps moving every year. It's 10 years from that date. And really the question therefore is, how do we engage with those actors in terms of trying to shape thinking around ecological thinking? And how do they relook at their practices, production methods, consumption practices to actually influence thinking in those sectors? And I think that's a conversation that we tend to shy away as academics and research institutions and the civil sector. But it's a conversation that we need to figure out because much of the change is happening.
So that I'm going to change the question a little bit for you, which is, if you went and asked communities, in language that, that they would, understand the question that we were asking, right? Like not what's an ecological science, but in their conception of what they might desire in their futures, what might they say is required of growth in ecological knowledge, or I'm not even sure how to phrase that question, but what's the conversation that we'd have with the community about this, that we've had with everybody else? What would that look like?
First of all, I would answer for them, like there are so many people, so who would want to answer it or have to answer it. I think the one thing that communities of when I've interacted with people over the years is that the slightly larger linkages are kind of missed out. So people have good understandings of local ecologies, of those interconnections and those things, and the larger ones are missed out. So I think that's where you get a lot more focus on my area, my landscape, what's happening around, but you might not get a lot of the linkages to larger climate change issues or things like dispersal of, those kind of things may be missed out in that sense. But I think like a lot of communities actually don't look at it as separate, right? As ecology as a separate thing. So it's also might be a bit confusing for most people to wonder why the hell you're even talking about it, because it would be as good as like figuring out how to construct a house. It's just something you need to know, and also looking at how to figure out what's happening with the plants and animals around is just part of life. would be the ideal way people would look at it. So I don't know if it would even be a relevant question to ask them.
I think that makes the point that I was going to get to, that often this is not the relevant question. We're sitting here and debating it, and we've made community, as you said, a complex, this whole complex system, and we define it by this word community, and we've given them like a node in this. But the way that we phrase the question is perhaps even not even the right framing for that very large sector that has such an important role to play. I don't think we're going to solve it right now. we have a few minutes. We have 10 minutes, so just want to sort of throw that out to questions from the audience. Yes. I was going to say self-select. We're going to go with people under 30 to begin with. Great. Yeah. I self-select. I'm not going to trust you.
Hi. So I have a question which was kind of related to what Anita was saying about marketplace, and I think all of us agree, kind of had a similar point of needing more scientists, and but then there's always the problem of getting the resources and funding for doing all these kinds of innovative and revolutionary research. But then we see that most of the funding in these sectors of science comes from either philanthropies or at the last priorities of the governmental scheme. So, and also the research that we do is more or much less oriented towards providing services or products to kind of integrate with the broader economy. So that's where we lack. So do you think is it a more viable solution to have more service or product oriented research, or whether we need more people to be aware about the ecological sciences and importance of conservation to actually build a sustainable ecosystem?
I think it's about, first of all, I'm sorry, I won't take a few.
No, let's go ahead. Yeah.
I think it's first of all about the willingness to have conversations and collaborate. It's not about jumping to products and services. But for example, let's take one example of afforestation, and everybody's got on to plant 1 trillion trees, plant 1 million trees, achieve carbon sequestration goals. It doesn't matter what you're planting, where you're planting, how you're planting. You don't look at survival rates, just plant and more. And there's a lot of money that's going into afforestation schemes from many of the corporates. So why are we not having meaningful conversations in terms of actually bringing the science to them on how to do restoration in a meaningful manner? What are the metrics you should be measuring? How do you track survival data? What else do you look at? It's not that people are not open to have this conversation, they just don't know better. And we are unable to engage with them. So I think some of it is also just about opening doors and having conversations and not necessarily looking at it as do I need to give a product or a service. And that's a start.
Hello, yeah, that was an excellent discussion. So, just continuing on the economic aspect, like we have seen that during the pre-COVID times and even post-COVID times, we have seen that government and other agencies are promoting environmental friendly activities through television or anything as it. They are also promoting minimalistic behavior. But at the same time, we can see, and we have seen that during the COVID time, a lot of anthropogenic impacts came down and the food was getting much more stable. But at the same time, the economy dropped, and then the government was like promoting that we should come out and start buying stuff because it aids to the economy. So there is like this, we get into this confusion like, oh, okay, should I buy stuff and boost the economy, or should I be minimalistic? So there is a disparity that has happened, and as Madam has pointed out that now I know that she said that we should be talking to the economics, and we should also be considering human behavior at a population scale and a global scale. But the next question is that how do we merge these fields and find a solution? What should be the more practical steps taken up that can bring about some consensus into it?
I think that's a entire conversation for a whole day, and we need a bunch of economists in the room. But I think it goes back to, I guess, what are the models that we are still building our world on, and what are the practices that we're adopting in terms of measuring growth and even looking at growth as a metric. There is no easy answer for that. Governments will prioritize job creation, will prioritize livelihoods, but the question is, can you do it in a form and manner which is much better than what is being pursued today, even in existing industries? And how do you look at new industries that can actually contribute to more sustainable methods of production? How do we actually look at consumption not through the continuous growth lens, but look at it from the lens of what we truly need and what the impact on the planet is? And I think it goes back to the fact that the metric that all of us have unfortunately got comfortable with is GDP, gross domestic product, which is a wartime metric, came in at that point in time and was relevant at that point in time. But economists have not changed the metric away from GDP for almost close to 80, 90 years now. We continue to operate on GDP as the reference point of how do you look at judging nations and their growth and the services that they provide to their citizens. And unless we explore that into looking at other aspects of not just human development index but the ecological footprint of our activities on the planet, we are going to continue to look at only economic metrics as the reference point of a nation's delivery to its citizens.
Can I? Yeah, I just want to add.
No, I was just trying to say, because your question is also kind of at a more personal philosophical level, right? What do you do when you engage? I was just going to take your thing of this whole restoration. So, for example, I think generally as ecologists, we are quite insular, we don't like to engage with the outside world. I think it's very hard to go beyond that. So we kind of get very snarky, right? So there's this whole thing of Miyawaki forests. Okay, so now I know that you have people funding Miyawaki forests, so doing all of these things. So recently there was this bunch of people who wanted to do urban forests in Bangalore. And it came to me to correct the terminology and then send it out to the ecologists, but I purposely didn't do it. So I let it be called urban microforest, or whatever. And it was interesting to see that a bunch of people were like, oh my god, what is this? This is terrible, I don't want to be involved. But then a bunch of people were like, hey, cool, let's see how do we get our perspective. Sheshaji, for example, was on that call and figured out, okay, let's try and see if people are open to understanding. So I think at a personal level, I think it's just important to be a bit open-minded and try and see how you can lead, whether it's talking to economists or anyone else, philanthropy, whatever it is, but not be insular. And I think that answers it. I don't think there's a structured way to do it, but just to not just be like, oh my god, this is my world and I will not talk to anyone who speaks about Miyawaki because I'm a restoration ecologist. It's as simple as that. And I think that is what will help, especially once he has finished working and going out. I think that's what's needed, is this interdisciplinary kind of outlook on life.
Yeah, people become ecologists because they like animals and plants, not because they like people. It's a fundamental problem.
But if he's smart enough to then figure out who will help me with that.
I agree with all that.
I beg to be the example of the discourse.
So, the eternally youthful Ajay Raghav still hasn't turned 30, has a question.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm Ajay Raghav from the MOFCC. I think first of all, congratulations to the CES 142nd anniversary, and I think MOFCC is very grateful that it helped in setting up and nurturing this over a long period of time through various I think programs. I think there's a lot of wonderful work has been done by individuals who have actually been in this center and the whole ecosystem of research which has gone around. As an odd man out who's not an ecologist, but I did study ecology as one of the course in the 5th semester. I think long time back in my civil engineering. So ecology was something which I heard, I think an EPOM, I still remember. So, as a person from the Environment Ministry, we would, as I think there's a lot of suggestion on policy implications, and there is also, I think, discussion that there is lack of money in this field. We think that I think there has to be more engagement of the centers like this in problem solving, because whether it's an issue of Western Ghats, invasive species, or restoration ecology, where we want to, I think, do work on some of the degraded areas, or anything related to, for example, the water, river cleaning and all. So there is a lot of, I think, inputs which can be given. And I work in the area of climate change. So we would, I think, urge that there has to be more interaction on policy formulation and policy relevant research. You may have core science and publications and other, that is part, but I think more of policy relevant research is what is needed. Whether it is goes into our long-term strategy on climate change, which we have given in 2022, I think, but there's nothing on ecology or implications of that, or the NDC which we are framing and will be submitting to the UN very soon this year itself. And I also look after work on national reporting, and there are, I think, a number of stakeholders in this institute which help us in preparing whether it's impact of climate change on biodiversity or even on the forest inventory. So I think there is endless research which can be done on implications, policy implications, and that is what ministry would look forward in the coming years. And of course, LTO work, which we, I think, initiated, I think has to go a long way, and we will look forward to the results, which can then be, as a ministry, can give directions to the other state forest departments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajay. I should say that Ajay Raghav has been one of the principal people at the MOAF that's been supporting the long-term ecological observations program across the country, and so we're grateful for that support. I think on that note, we'll wrap the panel. Stay for a second. Could the 4 people in blue just stand up and walk out? Oops. Starting another one, yeah. Blue for blue. 1 second. We have something for you, and one second. Just, Shashi, just go there, order. Okay. Thank you so much, distinguished panelists. And as you can see, the students have been rehearsing this for days.